Well, I can get you a couple roaches if you want them.
You got them, I'll take them. I mean, have a little comic relief here.
I know you gotta go down,
so.
Put a sign on that door that says presentation.
Don't
in
ever say
progress
that,
down
because you
there.
never know about it.
Doctors.
He drive
Can I
up
ask you
here?
a question?
He said drove up here from Florida.
We always leave.
Oh, y'all flew from Florida? What the hell?
So,
Drive, make that
you know,
money.
you're cleaning
It's
someone
drove.
off with water and
Get a rental car.
aspiration.
I get a rental car.
My city come all the way from that.
That means-
So they don't
Lowest
really
thing I
answer
want
the phone.
more.
Well,
Cover-
No, drive our personal vehicle. We don't make us get a rental car.
Thank you for
I mean,
morning.
that's the way to go. I mean, I'm paying extra, I'll end up paying probably $120 for the week. And then, maybe $40 per day.
Let me win.
You know, when you're ready, when you're watching.
You ready?
Anytime. Is the video ready? Good morning, everybody. How y'all doing today?
Good.
Good. My name is Joseph Zalay. I'm a paramedic FTI, City of Detroit Fire Department. Been a paramedic for the last 10 years. I love it. Best job in the world. We'll be talking today about the Bath school disaster. Already had our safety briefing from Instructor Navarro. Everything stays in place. No need to add anything. Objectives today, we're going to discuss the key people in the event, discuss key factors leading up to the event, discuss the limited role of the first responders and why their role is limited as far as at the school. Okay, so Bath Township. Small township, northeast of Lansing. Population at the time 820, mostly farmers, farm town here, as you can see on the map here. Key player here, this is Andrew Kehoe. Born February 1st, 1872, Tecumseh, Michigan, small town, southern Michigan, not too far actually from where I live. Studied electrical engineering, Michigan State College. Worked as an electrician, and he was married to Ellen Nellie Price in 1912. He was elected in 1924 as a trustee and treasurer for the school board. Now that's important, it'll be important a little bit later here. He did have a fiery past. His stepmother was ignited on fire while attempting to light a stove. Stoves back in the time were oil-based, okay? Kehoe threw water on her. So if any of you know anything about oil and water, they don't mix. Threw water on his stepmother, parent attempt to extinguish her. However, due to the oil base, the fire only spread, causing the death of his stepmother. Many speculated that he had tampered with the stove and caused the ignition of his stepmother. And at this time, he was only 14 years old. So this guy was pretty much messed up from a pretty young age. That's Andrew. He built a house and started a farm in 1919. It's a very large two-story house, a very large barn. That will come into play a little bit later as well here. All right. They say good things happen to good people. If the opposite is true, it's true for Mr. Kehoe here. 1925, he was defeated in the election for township clerk. Nellie, his wife, was diagnosed with tuberculosis. 1926, notified that his farm was to be foreclosed. Okay, Mr. Kehoe was a very narcissistic man. He didn't like seeing anything taken from him. In a very short period of time, he saw that his government job was being taken from him. He saw his wife was going to be taken from him, and he was notified that his house was going to be taken from him. Okay, this made him despise government. He did not like big government. So, fall of 1926, he plans his revenge. Now, as Instructor Stevens went over yesterday, one of the biggest things that we see after a terrorist event is a lot can be avoided. If you see something, you say something. So, for much the next year, neighbor noticed that he had stopped working on his farm and thought he might be planning suicide. Much of the next year, his neighbor thought he was going to kill himself. His neighbor obviously didn't like him too much. He didn't say nothing, didn't look into it much further. But during that period, Kehoe purchased explosives and discreetly planted them on his property and under the school. So he was still a school employee at this time. He was able to access the school unnoticed, undetected. Okay, so why the school? Kehoe was known for being a very frugal man. And construction of the new school was being constructed, meant his taxes were going to go up. He had such a large farm that he had to pay a big share of taxes. Back then it was $198 a year. Today that equivalent would be about $2,800 per year. Now, he was defeated as treasurer, so this stung a little extra for Mr. Kehoe. Okay, plan in motion. He made several trips to Lansing for explosives. Back in the time, in the farm era, explosives were nowhere near as regulated as they are now. It wasn't uncommon for farmers to buy small amounts of explosives to use on their farm. Later on, a neighbor of Mr. Kehoe's stated that he heard explosives going off not infrequently on the farm, nicknamed him the Dynamite Farmer. Planted wired homemade dynamite and Pyritol bombs in the house and on the buildings of the farm, and 900 pounds was planted at the school. He also loaded the back seat of his truck with lots of metal debris that would be producing shrapnel, and later on we'll go over he used his vehicle in the attack as well. Mind of a madman. Okay, earlier in the year, Kehoe invited a teacher and several students to his farm for a picnic. And he told one of the teachers, going back to see something, say something, if you want to have a picnic, you better have it right away.
Wow.
So, I mean, today that probably would be noticed a little more. It should have been noticed back then. However, she didn't say anything. She didn't seem to think that that was a whole lot to worry about. It was. The warning was never reported. On the day of the disaster, approximately 7 a.m., he murdered his wife in her sleep. He then put her into a wheelbarrow, parked it out by one of the barns that would later catch on fire. Her body wasn't actually discovered for a couple days. Responders walked by her charred remains for quite some time before they actually knew what they were looking at. In the days after the event, they thought she was at a tuberculosis clinic, and they did find his wife in the wheelbarrow here. Now this is kind of sick here. He warned the neighbor children that morning that they were not safe. They're not safe near his farm. Okay, he said, I like y'all. You're not safe here, but what did he tell them to do? He told them to go to school. Okay? Which is later on where he was planning to attack. At 8 a.m., Andrew ignited all the bombs, destroying all buildings and his house. Now remember back in the time, fire department's a little smaller, a little less capable of dealing with what we can today, and even at today's time, we'd have a hard time with this. So he ignited all the bombs, destroying his house. First responders came, and all the first responders were busy at his house and his farm dealing with the blaze there. Day of the disaster. Notified local first responders about the explosion on his farm, and he also advised them that there would be an incident 10 minutes away at the school. At 8:15, he got into his truck, which he had previously loaded with the shrapnel, and he drove to the school. Bath Township School. Big picture of it right there. Okay. At the school, at 8:30, an explosion hit the east wing of Bath Township School. At 8:45, Kehoe drove to the school, and later on, witness reports state he called the administrator over to his truck. They were seen arguing, and then he detonated the dynamite that was in his truck. He actually detonated it by shooting it with a rifle. That detonation, along with the previous one, caused the collapse of the north wing of the school. That is the truck that he used. The only thing reportedly left of Mr. Kehoe was his intestines that were hanging on the steering column when responders checked the truck. Now there was a little bit of divine intervention here, if you want to call it that. All but one second grade student survived this attack. Now the reason they did, this teacher was having a story time, moved all the students to one area. They were all kind of huddled around her. When the building collapsed, they were in a safer area. Had they not been in that area, they more likely not would have been killed. Also, the sixth graders were moved to a separate part of the building for exams that day. They would have been killed had that not happened as well. 112 students, 14 teachers and staff in the school. 36 children and 2 teachers were killed in the primary explosion. Kehoe, 5 children, and the school administrator were killed in a secondary truck bombing. And 1 more child died later at the hospital. It was actually much later, several months later. She had survived several surgeries, and then she unfortunately took a turn for the worst, and she did not survive this event. So Mr. Kehoe kind of saw, once again, if I can't have it, no one can. I can't have my farm, you're going to foreclose on it. Well, no one can have my farm. I can't have my wife, she's diagnosed with TB, she's going to be taken from me. Well, no one can have my wife. And his job at the school, well, if it's not mine, I'll just take the school. Total of 45 people killed in this incident, including Mr. Kehoe and his slain wife. The aftermath of the event. Eventually, 34 firefighters and the chief of Lansing Fire Department arrived on scene. The injured and dying were transported to Sparrow Hospital. Not my favorite hospital, but that's a different story. Now, local physician and his wife, who happened to be a nurse, they owned a drugstore. They turned it into a triage center. Dead bodies were taken to town hall, which was used as a morgue. A little interesting fact, 2 children were taken to this makeshift morgue, presumed dead. Within the next hour, they did recover from the explosion stupor. They were seen that they were alive, they received treatment, and they did recover, luckily. Responders. Now, as we spoke earlier, he had detonated everything at his house. His house was burning, his farm was burning. All the responders were tied up on that incident, meaning their response was very delayed to that school. It was found out days later that Kehoe had planned a failed secondary device to go off at the time of first responders. So, good thing it failed, and it's a good thing that had it not failed, they probably wouldn't have been there. 700 pounds pyritol and dynamite were found days later, time for the first responders. All right, secondary devices. This is a little more of a recent topic here we'll talk about. Typically, devices will be hidden out of view locations or planted in devices in ordinary objects such as vehicles, flashlights, briefcases, flower pots, garbage can. Usually, the devices are detonated by time delay, although radio-controlled devices or cell phone-activated devices could be used. This is why it's a huge concern as far as any kind of terrorist incident with first responders using their portable radios. A lot of times there's a concern with that. In '97, a Puerto Rican officer was actually killed by a secondary device that was hidden in a flashlight attached to a tilt switch. As soon as he knocked the flashlight over, the flashlight was moved. It did explode and it did end up killing him. How to prepare. U.S. Fire Administration has some tips on how to prepare and how to anticipate a secondary device. Anticipate the presence of a secondary device at any suspicious incident. Search for a secondary device before moving on to the incident area. Avoid touching or moving anything that may conceal an explosive device. And evacuate victims and non-essential personnel as quickly as possible. Preserve the scene as much as possible for evidence collection. This is all great advice. This is all fantastic. Sitting in a room creating protocols and things that responders should do. As Chief Sloan stated yesterday, he always goes up to the hotel. He wants the room closest to the door just in case. However, if he sees anybody in trouble, he hears screaming, he's not leaving. He's going out. So this is all great in theory, but is it something that responders are going to do when they see a bunch of people hurt, see a bunch of people down? Is, oh, hold on, we got to check for secondary. You love it too, but at the same point, it's not going to happen. So just be aware of your surroundings as much as you can. But you're out there to help people. It's one of, unfortunately, the inherent dangers about being out here doing this. Our takeaway. First documented time a secondary device was planted and intended for first responders. First time, fortunately, it's not the last time. Many warning signs, including literal signs, were ignored. Mr. Kehoe, this is a sign on Mr. Kehoe's farm fence. States criminals are made, not born. Okay, it goes back to his dissent, as far as he's saying that I wasn't this way, but I took this hit, and well, now I'm a criminal, and now I'm coming after you. And be careful out there. Okay, we're gonna take just a real quick minute, do a quick knowledge assessment here. Okay, so I'll read the questions out. Once they're all out, just shout them out. But give me a second to get them out there. In what state is Bath Township located? We've got Florida, New York, Michigan, or Wisconsin. What state? Michigan. Absolutely.
Michigan.
You're right. Question number 2. Who played a primary role in the events in Bath Township? Was it Edgar Allan Poe, Mike Tyson, Winston Churchill, or Andrew Kehoe?
Andrew Kehoe.
Fantastic. What were the 2 types of explosives used? Lucite and black powder, dynamite and ammonium nitrate, pyritol and dynamite, sawdust and talcum powder. Pyritol and dynamite, absolutely.
Talcum powder is never explosive.
Question number 4. What office did Andrew Kehoe run for? Again, he held it and lose. County assessor, school board, township clerk, building inspector. Township clerk. You're absolutely right. He lost the clerk election. You guys are doing very well. What's the name of Mr. Kehoe's wife? Jake Smith, Ellen Nellie Price, Tracy Morgan, or Olive Newton-John? Go with Ellen Nellie Price, absolutely. 6. True or false? First explosion occurred at the school. False, absolutely. First explosion, as we stated, occurred at his house, which is why the role of firefighters and first responders was so delayed and so limited in this incident, which he absolutely went for. Question 7. True or false? Andrew Kehoe notified local first responders of the explosion.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it is true. Question 8. True or false? Secondary device was timed for the arrival of first responders. Absolutely true. First documented case. Question number 9. With what illness was Andrew's wife Nellie diagnosed? Was it MS, TB, tuberculosis, HIV, or cancer? TB. Absolutely.
I feel like King Jennings.
And question number 10. What was the name of the school involved in the incident? I'm not going to wait for you, that was Bath School. All right. So that's going to be the end of the presentation. I got time for 1 or 2 questions here if anyone's got anything. Sir?
So he put explosives at the school beforehand, right?
He did. For many months he did. Now, he had access to the school because he was part of their board at the time. And so yes, in the months prior, he'd be sneaking in small amounts of dynamite, pyritol, end up being 900 pounds at the end, plus 700 pounds for the first responder.
Did those explosives go off because of his car?
Nope, the original explosives, remember he was a electrical engineer, okay, so he was able to rig some type of switch to detonate those either by time or remotely. So those went off while he was on his way to the school. They went off about 8:30. His truck didn't detonate until about 8:45, about 15 minutes later. So that's a good question. Okay, anything else?
Hang on.
Sir?
Is this close to where you live or where?
Well, no, it's actually close to where Mr. Stevens lives. It's a little northeast of Lansing. I live down in a little town called Monroe. I actually grew up near where the Andrew Kehoe grew up. He lives in Tecumseh. That's about a half-hour, 40-minute drive.
Is there any kind of markers or anything at the school or any kind of
There
monument?
is. I didn't actually get it on the slide there. There's, it's really a big stone. It's with a looks like a copper or brass nameplate just has the name of the students, and that's at the location of the awning here.
That's kind of sacred ground, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, absolutely.
There's still, and like in our area, even where I live, there's still, I know in our 200-mile radius, and there's one in our school districts, we still have a one-room schoolhouse still in operation in our town. From first grade to like 5th grade.
All right, well, thank you guys so much for your time. Have a great rest of your day.